I stood in the back of the marble-floored conference room, watching my husband kiss another woman's hand like she was royalty, his fingers lingering just a second too long while every executive in the room pretended not to notice. Richard didn't see me. He never did anymore. But in exactly 4 minutes, when the board meeting started, he was going to see me in a way that would shatter everything he thought he knew about his perfect, controlled life. My name is Julia Brennan, and 3 months ago, I was Mrs. Richard Brennan, wife of the CEO of Brennan Industries, a woman who smiled politely at charity galas and kept her mouth shut when her husband came home smelling like expensive perfume that wasn't mine. I wore the right dresses. I said the right things. I played the role so well that even I started to believe I was just the decoration on his arm, the pretty nobody who got lucky when a billionaire decided to marry down. I met Richard 12 years ago when I was a financial analyst at a mid-sized investment firm, and he was already on his way to building an empire. He told me I was brilliant. He told me I saw numbers the way artists see color. On our second date, he asked me to look at a merger proposal his team had put together, and I found 3 fatal flaws in the financial projections that would have cost him $40 million. He proposed 6 months later. I thought it was love. Maybe part of it was, but I know now that Richard Brennan doesn't love people. He collects them. He uses them. And when they stop being useful, he throws them away like damaged stock. For the first 5 years, I helped him build everything. I was the one who restructured his debt. I was the one who identified the acquisition targets that doubled his portfolio. Late nights in our home office, I'd run projections while he worked the phones, and we'd celebrate every win like we were a team, like we were partners. He'd pull me into his lap and whisper that I was his secret weapon, his good luck charm, the smartest person he'd ever met. I loved those nights. I loved feeling needed. I loved believing we were building something together. Then I got pregnant, and everything changed. Richard started taking meetings without me. He stopped asking for my input. When I'd offer analysis on a deal, he'd smile that patient, patronizing smile and say, "Sweetheart, you should focus on the nursery. Let the team handle the business side." I told myself it was temporary. I told myself he was just trying to protect me, to let me rest. But after I lost the baby, at 22 weeks, something in me shattered. And instead of pulling me close, Richard pulled away. He stayed later at the office. He traveled more. He looked at me like I was broken furniture he didn't know how to fix. That's when Vanessa appeared. Vanessa Chen, 28 years old, Stanford MBA. Legs that went on for days, and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Richard hired her as his executive VP, and suddenly she was in every meeting, every dinner, every business trip. She'd laugh at his jokes, touch his arm when she talked, lean in close during presentations like she was sharing state secrets. And Richard ate it up. He'd light up around her in ways he hadn't lit up around me in years. I wasn't stupid. I knew what was happening, but I told myself I was being paranoid, insecure, damaged from the loss. Until the night I came home early from my sister's house and found Vanessa's shoes by our bedroom door. Red Louboutins, size 7. Still warm. I didn't go upstairs. I couldn't. I stood in the foyer of the house I'd helped buy, the house where I'd decorated every room and planned a future that was crumbling like sand, and I knew with absolute certainty that my marriage was over. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't storm up those stairs and throw her shoes at his head. Instead, I picked them up, set them neatly by the door, and I walked back to my car. I drove to a hotel, and I started making calls. My first call was to Margaret Chen, Richard's largest independent shareholder and Vanessa's aunt. The irony wasn't lost on me. Margaret and I had become friends over the years, at various corporate events. She was old money, sharp as a tack, and she despised nepotism and corporate games. I told her I needed her advice on a sensitive business matter. We met for coffee the next morning. I didn't tell her about the affair, not directly. I didn't have to. I showed her the financial reports Richard had been presenting to the board for the last 18 months. Reports that looked healthy on the surface but buried a serious cash flow problem in subsidiary accounts. Reports that I'd helped create the systems to track back when I was still part of the inner circle. Margaret's face went very still. "Does Richard know you've seen these?" "Richard doesn't know I see anything anymore," I said. "He thinks I spend my days shopping and getting my nails done." Margaret folded her hands on the table. "What do you need?" "I need a very good lawyer," I said, "and I need you to trust me for about 90 days. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman who'd been underestimated her entire life and had made a career out of proving people wrong. "I think we can arrange that." The divorce papers hit Richard on a Tuesday morning. I had them served at his office, right before a board meeting, because I wanted him rattled. His lawyer called mine within an hour. Gerald Simmons, the best divorce attorney money could buy. A man who'd made his fortune protecting wealthy men from their soon-to-be ex-wives. I could picture Gerald's smug face as he looked over my filing. Community property, standard division of assets, no mention of the business. Richard probably thought I was rolling over, that I was going to take my settlement and disappear quietly. He called me that night. First time he'd called me directly in 3 weeks. "Julia, we need to talk about this. You're being irrational." "Am I?" "You're upset, I understand. But divorce? Really? Over what? We can work through whatever this is." "Whatever this is," I repeated. "You mean your affair with Vanessa?" Silence. "Then, I don't know what you think you know. I know she wears a size 7 shoe. I know she drinks chai lattes with oat milk. I know she laughs like a hyena at your terrible jokes, and I know you bought her a diamond bracelet for her birthday last month, $20,000. You put it on our joint credit card." More silence. When he spoke again, his voice was different, colder. "If you try to drag this out or come after the company, you'll regret it. I'll bury you in legal fees. You'll walk away with nothing." "We'll see," I said, and hung up. The next 3 months were brutal. Richard played every card he had. He froze our joint accounts. He had his lawyers file motion after motion, challenging every asset claim, every request for documentation. Gerald stood in court and painted me as a gold digger, a woman who'd contributed nothing to Richard's success, who was now trying to cash in on his hard work. They trotted out prenup clauses I'd signed 12 years ago when I was young and in love, and stupid enough to think that legally protecting his premarital assets was reasonable. They had witnesses testify that I'd been unstable since the miscarriage, that I'd withdrawn from Richard, that I'd refused counseling. I sat through every hearing with my lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Moss, who didn't come cheap, but who understood exactly what we were doing. Patricia was careful. She didn't push hard. She asked for reasonable things. She let Gerald think he was winning, because he was. On paper, I was getting destroyed. The judge awarded me a modest settlement. The house we'd bought together would be sold and split. I'd get a small percentage of liquid assets. No stake in the company. No ongoing support beyond 2 years of alimony. Richard's lawyer shook his hand in the courthouse hallway and told him it was a clean win. Richard looked across the hallway at me, and he smiled. Not a warm smile. A victor's smile. Then Vanessa appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his, and they walked out together. She was wearing the bracelet. I watched them go, and I didn't react. Patricia touched my arm. "You okay?" "Perfect," I said. 1 week after the divorce was finalized, Richard announced his engagement to Vanessa. They had a party, a big one. He rented out the rooftop of the city's most expensive hotel and invited everyone who mattered: business partners, investors, board members, press. It was a power move, a statement that he'd moved on, upgraded, that his life was better than ever. I knew about the party because Margaret called me. "He's being insufferable," she said. "Vanessa's hanging on him like a Christmas ornament. You should see the ring he bought her. Vulgar." "Sounds like Richard," I said. "The board meeting is scheduled for next month," Margaret said carefully. "Everything still on track on your end?" "Everything's perfect." I'd been busy during those 3 months of legal warfare, while Richard was smugly watching his lawyers steamroll me in court. I was having very quiet, very private conversations with some very important people. Margaret had opened doors, old money doors, the kind of investors who didn't appreciate messy corporate drama or ethical lapses. I'd spent 12 years learning every detail of Richard's business, and I'd spent the last 3 months showing a select group of people exactly where the problems were: the cash flow issues, the overstated projections, the risky leveraged positions that Richard had hidden in the subsidiary reports. The board didn't know. Most shareholders didn't know. But they were about to. I'd also been busy with something else. 6 years ago, I'd developed a financial modeling software that could predict market shifts based on consumer behavior patterns. I'd built it during one of those late nights when Richard and I were still partners, and I'd offered it to him for the company. He'd looked at it, said it was interesting but not commercial, and told me to focus on the core business. So I'd shelved it. But I'd kept the code. And over the last year, quietly, I'd refined it. I'd tested it. And then I'd sold it to a venture capital firm for $18 million. The sale closed 2 weeks before Richard filed for divorce. The money never touched our joint accounts. It was mine, separate property. My lawyer had structured it perfectly. With that $18 million, I'd done something Richard never saw coming. I'd started buying shares in Brennan Industries. Not big purchases. Nothing that would trigger attention. Small blocks through shell companies and investment firms, scattered across different accounts. Margaret helped. She had friends who wanted in once they saw the data I'd compiled. And slowly, quietly, over 12 weeks, I accumulated enough shares to matter. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Thursday. Richard had called it to approve a major acquisition, something that would expand his empire and cement his legacy. He needed board approval. He needed the votes. He was so confident. He'd invited Vanessa to sit in, to learn, to watch him work. He strutted into that marble-floored conference room like he owned the world, because in his mind, he did. Vanessa was at his side in a white dress that probably cost more than most people's cars, smiling at everyone, playing the role of the brilliant young executive and soon-to-be wife. I was already there, in the back, wearing a simple black suit and my hair pulled back. No jewelry, no drama. I looked like an assistant, maybe, or a lawyer. Nobody paid attention to me. Why would they? Richard had made sure everyone knew I was nobody. Just the ex-wife who'd taken her settlement and disappeared. Richard sat at the head of the conference table, Vanessa to his right, Gerald across from him, looking pleased with himself. Margaret was there, sitting quietly, her face neutral. The other board members filtered in, investors, key shareholders, everyone who mattered. Richard started the meeting with his usual confidence. Thank you all for coming. Today we're going to approve the Cordova acquisition, which will increase our market position by 30%, and that's when the door opened, and Patricia walked in, followed by two other lawyers and a man in a suit carrying a briefcase. Richard paused, frowning. I'm sorry. This is a closed board meeting. Not anymore, Patricia said smoothly. She handed a document to Margaret, who was sitting in the board secretary position. We're here to present a formal challenge to current leadership and propose a vote of no confidence in the CEO. The room went silent. Richard stared. What? Under the company bylaws, Patricia continued, any shareholder with at least 15% of voting shares can call for a leadership review. We represent a coalition of shareholders holding 18%. She gestured to me. Led by Julia Brennan. Every head in the room turned. Richard's face went white, then red. Julia, what the hell is this? I walked forward slowly, my heels clicking on the marble. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just met his eyes. It's exactly what she said. A leadership review. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice sharp. You can't be serious. You don't even have shares in this company. You walked away with nothing. I walked away from the marriage with a settlement, I said calmly. But I never stopped being a shareholder. In fact, over the last 3 months, I've acquired quite a few more shares. 18%, like Patricia said. Enough to call this meeting, enough to have a vote. Richard slammed his hand on the table. This is insane. Margaret, you can't allow this. Margaret looked at him over her reading glasses. Actually, Richard, the bylaws are very clear. The motion is valid. We'll hear the case. Gerald started blustering about procedural challenges and legal standing, but Patricia shut him down with case law and corporate charter citations. She was better than him, and everyone in that room knew it. The board voted to hear the challenge. 5 minutes later, I was standing at the head of the conference table with a presentation remote in my hand, and Richard staring at me like I'd grown a second head. For the past 18 months, I began, my voice steady, this company has been presenting financial reports that overstate revenue, underreport liabilities, and hide significant cash flow problems in subsidiary accounts. The Cordova acquisition that Richard is asking you to approve today would be funded with leveraged debt that this company cannot safely carry given our actual financial position. I clicked the remote. A slide appeared on the screen behind me. Numbers, charts, Data that I knew better than anyone in that room because I'd helped build the systems that tracked it. These are the real numbers, not the ones you've been shown in quarterly reports. The real ones. Richard shot to his feet. This is defamation. She's lying. She has no access to. I have access, Margaret said quietly, because I requested an independent audit 6 weeks ago. Everything Julia is presenting has been verified by our external accounting firm. The room erupted. Board members started talking over each other, demanding explanations. Richard's face was purple. He pointed at me. "You vindictive. You're doing this because I left you. Because you couldn't handle that I moved on." "I'm doing this," I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a blade, "because you're running this company into the ground. You're so busy playing power games and impressing your mistress that you've lost track of what actually matters. The business, the employees, the shareholders who trusted you." Vanessa stood up, her voice shaking. "How dare you? Richard built this company from nothing." "Richard built this company with my help," I said, looking right at her. "I was the one who restructured the debt in 2019. I was the one who identified the Henderson merger. I was the one who saved him $40 million on the Taipei deal. But you wouldn't know that, because Richard doesn't talk about the people he uses. He just takes the credit and moves on." Patricia stepped forward. "We're proposing a new CEO. Someone with the financial expertise to stabilize the company, the shareholder confidence to attract new investment, and the ethical standards to restore trust in leadership." Richard laughed, but it sounded desperate. "And who exactly do you think is going to—" "Me," I said. The silence was absolute. Richard stared at me. Vanessa's mouth actually fell open. Even Gerald looked shocked. "The coalition of shareholders I represent holds 18% of voting shares," I continued. "Margaret Chen represents another 22%. Together with smaller investors who've agreed to support this motion, we have 53%, enough to remove you as CEO and install new leadership. The vote will happen today, at the end of this meeting, after the board has reviewed all financial documentation and heard statements from both sides." Richard found his voice. It came out strangled. "You can't do this. This is my company. I built this." "You built it with my brain and other people's money," I said. "And now you're destroying it with your ego. The board will decide if that continues." The next 2 hours were brutal. Patricia presented evidence. Financial experts testified. Board members asked hard questions that Richard couldn't answer because he'd been too busy managing his image to manage his company. Vanessa tried to defend him, but she didn't know the details. She knew the surface, the charm, the performance. She didn't know the guts of the business because Richard had never let her in that deep. He'd wanted a trophy, not a partner. Gerald tried every legal maneuver he could think of. He challenged my standing. He challenged the audit. He accused Margaret of conspiracy. But Patricia had prepared for everything, and the board was getting angrier by the minute as they realized how badly they'd been misled. At one point, Richard turned to me, his voice low and vicious. "Why are you doing this? You got your divorce. You got your money. Why do you need to destroy me?" I looked at him for a long moment. "I don't need to destroy you, Richard. You destroyed yourself. You threw away the one person who actually cared about building something real with you. And you replaced her with someone who cares about your credit card limit. You turned your back on integrity for ego. I'm not destroying you. I'm just refusing to let you take down everyone else with you. The vote happened at 4:30. Secret ballot. Each board member and major shareholder casting their decision. Margaret collected them in a small wooden box that looked almost ceremonial. When she counted them, her face was carefully neutral, but when she read the result, I saw the smallest hint of satisfaction in her eyes. The motion passes. Richard Brennan is removed as CEO, effective immediately. Julia Brennan is appointed interim CEO, pending a full transition plan. Richard sat frozen in his chair. Vanessa grabbed his arm, her voice panicked. "Richard, do something." "They can't. It's done," Margaret said firmly. "Mr. Brennan, you'll need to surrender your company devices and access credentials to security before you leave the building. You'll receive formal termination documentation and severance terms in accordance with your contract." Gerald started to argue about wrongful termination and lawsuits, but Richard just stood up. He looked at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Not anger, not hatred, fear. He was afraid. Because for the first time in his life, Richard Brennan had lost something he couldn't buy back. He walked out without another word. Vanessa scrambled after him, her heels clicking frantically on the marble. The conference room door closed behind them, and the remaining board members turned to me. I saw doubt in some faces, curiosity in others. Margaret simply nodded. "All right," I said, taking the seat at the head of the table. "Richard's seat. Let's talk about how we fix this company." The next 6 months were the hardest work of my life. I restructured the debt. I cleaned up the subsidiary mess. I canceled the Cordova acquisition and negotiated a smaller, smarter partnership that didn't leverage us into oblivion. I fired 3 executives who'd been cooking the books to make Richard look good, and I promoted the people who'd been doing the real work in the shadows. The stock price dipped at first because markets hate uncertainty, but then it climbed as investors saw real leadership and honest reporting. Within 4 months, we were outperforming projections. Within 6, we'd regained everything Richard had lost, and then some. Richard tried to fight it. He sued for wrongful termination. He gave interviews painting himself as a victim of a vindictive ex-wife's corporate coup. But the evidence was public now. The financial records, the mismanagement, the affair with a subordinate while married. His reputation shattered like glass. Companies that had wanted to work with Richard Brennan suddenly had no interest in working with a disgraced CEO who'd nearly bankrupted his own firm. His calls went unreturned. His meetings got canceled. Vanessa left him 3 months after the board meeting. I heard through Margaret that she'd gotten an offer from a competitor in New York and taken it without even discussing it with Richard. No dramatic breakup. She just left. Took the bracelet and the ring and whatever other expensive trinkets he'd bought her and moved on to the next opportunity. Because that's what she was good at. Spotting opportunities. And Richard wasn't one anymore. I saw him once after that, 6 months later, at a charity gala I couldn't avoid. He was there with some blonde woman I didn't recognize, trying to work the room, trying to rebuild his network. But people were polite and distant. He'd lost his power, and in those circles, power was everything. When he saw me across the ballroom, he actually started walking over. I considered leaving, but I stood my ground. When he reached me, he looked smaller somehow. Older. "Julia, Richard, you look well. Success suits you." "Thank you." He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. I suppose congratulations are in order. I heard about the Q3 numbers. Very impressive. The team did good work. Silence. Then, quietly. I underestimated you. I shouldn't have. No, I said. You shouldn't have. For what it's worth. He stopped, searching for words. I'm sorry for the affair, for how I treated you, for making you feel like you didn't matter. I looked at him. There was a part of me, a small part, that had waited years to hear those words. But standing there in my custom suit, running a company I'd helped build and then saved from his arrogance, those words felt hollow, too late, too small. I appreciate that, I said. But I don't need your apology, Richard. I needed it 3 years ago when you stopped seeing me as a partner. I needed it 2 years ago when you started the affair. I needed it 18 months ago when you made me feel worthless in my own home. I don't need it now. So that's it? We just move on, I said. You live your life. I live mine. And we never speak again. I walked away before he could respond. I didn't look back. A year later, Brennan Industries went public. We had an IPO that broke records for our sector. I stood on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange and rang the opening bell with Margaret at my side and Patricia in the crowd, smiling like a proud parent. The company I'd been erased from, the company I'd been told I never contributed to, was now undeniably mine. My vision, my leadership, my success. The morning of the IPO, I got a text from an unknown number. Just 2 words, you win. I deleted it without responding, because it was never about winning. It was about proving that I was never the nobody Richard had tried to make me believe I was. I was the brilliant financial analyst who saw things other people missed. I was the partner who built an empire from nothing. I was the woman who refused to disappear quietly when powerful men decided she wasn't useful anymore. I didn't win because Richard lost. I won because I finally saw my own worth. If you loved watching Julia take back everything she built and prove that underestimating the quiet ones is the biggest mistake you can make, hit that like button. Drop a comment and tell me, do you think Richard actually regretted what he did? Or was he just sorry he got caught? And if you want more stories about people who got knocked down but came back swinging harder than anyone expected, subscribe, because trust me, we're just getting started. Thanks for watching.